Good morning. Good morning. Last week we talked about coming to Jesus for rest as he offers. We talked about a rest for our souls. And this is going to be kind of following along that same theme. We're going to be talking about the Sabbath today. In Genesis 2:3 says, God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. That was the very first Sabbath. Long before God gave the Ten Commandments, long before the Israelites were a thing, long before we needed a day of rest, God lived the first Sabbath. It's something I want us to think about as we think about this. God didn't need the rest. God doesn't get worn out. God doesn't run out of energy. We do. And we see here that he chose to rest. And he chose to rest for a purpose. He chose to rest to sit back and enjoy the creation that he made. And that's a big part of our Sabbath as well, is reflecting on God and his creation, and even reflecting on the work that we've done throughout the week. Every time I've ever worked on a big project and completed it, it's nice to sit back and appreciate the work. You can appreciate what's happened there and be happy about it. And that's what God did in his creation. And we see here that he blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Now, we often ask God to bless things. We ask him to bless our food. We ask him to bless Grandma and Grandpa. We ask him to bless our loved ones. We ask him to bless our efforts, the people we care about. And here God blessed an entire day as a gift for us, and sanctified it, which means as we've talked about our own sanctification from God, it's setting apart, and it's a part of spiritual growth. And this day, this Sabbath day, plays an important part in that, and it was set aside of it. So, we ask for all these things that God might bless for us, but he blessed an entire day. One out of every 7 days he is blessed just for us. And what do people do with it? Pass out watching NASCAR or football, or sleep off Saturdays, hangover, or go shopping, hit the garage sales. I've spent Sabbaths doing every one of those things at some point or another. But what are we going to do with it? Because God sanctified it. He set it apart. Are we going to set it apart? Are we going to let it play a role in our sanctification as it was sanctified? I want to look at Exodus chapter 20. And this is a passage that we should all know. It's from the Ten Commandments. But Exodus chapter 20, beginning of verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So we see that it's a time of remembrance of God's work, as we saw in creation. And what does it mean that he hallowed it? He made it holy. This isn't just a day to nap. This is a day to give to God, to reflect on him, to abide in him. And we see more purpose in Deuteronomy chapter 5, when the Ten Commandments are recapped here. Beginning at verse 12, observe the Sabbath day, and this is going to sound pretty similar, but there are some differences. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, nor your male servant, your female servant, may rest as well as you. And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Verse 15 here is a reminder of the freedom God had given them. It's a reminder of his salvation for them from Egypt. And that's a big part of it for us today, is a reminder of our salvation. A reminder to us of Jesus saving us, his redemptive work on the cross, just as it was a reminder to them of their time in Egypt and their freedom from it. And this is a major part of the Sabbath. And as it's observed, and as we reflect on God through it, and as we dwell on him, it's going to be a constant reminder to us, week by week by week, a reminder of God's wonderful work that he's done for us. And as we're keeping him at the forefront of our mind through this, it's going to be hard to lose focus from him. And I want to look a little more at the purpose of this Sabbath. Exodus 31, verses 16 and 17. Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me, God, and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. It's a sign between him and them forever. It's a reminder. It's remembrance of his work as creator. It's a time that God stopped to appreciate the fruit of his labor, and it's a time for us to do the same. It's time for us to follow his example. It's a time for us, what did it do for God? It refreshed him. If it's refreshing for God, who doesn't actually even get tired, how refreshing would it be for us when we often desperately need that? We need that refreshing. As we see in Deuteronomy 5:15 again, it's a remembrance. It's a time of remembrance of God's salvation from Egypt. And we need to use that to reflect on the salvation that God has given us. Memorial Weekend, Memorial Day, we remember and we honor the ones who have served and given their lives for our freedom in this world. The Sabbath is a more frequent time to sit and reflect and remember and honor the one who died for our spiritual freedom. It's a weekly time to honor him for that. And another example of its purpose we see in Ezekiel 20, verse 12. It says, "Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them." And when people are taking intentional time every single week, intentional time to focus on God, they're not going to forget about him. And when people as a whole do that, God is honored and is remembered. But when it gets dismissed, people start to lose sight of God. People start to lose focus as a whole on God as a society. Think back, I'm sure a lot of you can remember a time when very little, if anything, was open on Sundays. Jobs rarely would have anybody working on Sundays. They would give you the day off. They wouldn't even be open that day in most cases. And now it's like just about everywhere, every factory you go to, it's 7 days a week right now, and people are just getting pulled in so many directions because the pace of life is faster. We're getting pulled in more directions. There's more chaos, and it makes it a lot more difficult. So in God's purposes for this, it's a time of remembrance. It's a time to know. This helps us know God and be sanctified by him. Because if we're spending this time fruitfully with him, maybe we're quieting down and praying more. Maybe we're getting away from the noise and getting in his word more and getting to know him more. getting closer and closer and understanding him. But there are also purposes that are not its purposes. Turn in your Bibles, if you would, to Luke chapter 13. But before we get to that, before I start reading from that, I'm going to read a passage from Mark 2, verses 27 and 28. And he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath." And we see examples throughout Mark chapter 2, throughout Matthew 12, Luke 13, where we're about to be, where Jesus would do something on the Sabbath, and these Pharisees, who loved him so much, would come along and try to accuse him for doing these things on the Sabbath. Maybe they were plucking grain to eat on the Sabbath. Maybe he was healing someone on the Sabbath. And they would try to use that against him. And what his point is, this day is a gift of rest. It's not to be a burden. How can something be a burden and restful? And in Luke 13, we see an illustration of this from verses 10 through 17. "Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bent over, and could in no way raise herself up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to himself, and said to her, 'Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity.' And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he said to the crowd, 'There are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath day.' And the Lord then answered them and said, 'Hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan had bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath?' And when he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame, and all the multitude rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him." And this is just like in our trivia question earlier. What did Jesus say? It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. See, this day, this Sabbath time that God has set apart, it's not meant to be a restriction. It's not meant to hold us down and burden us. It's a gift. And so often we don't see it as that, but I've talked to so many people, and I've even wondered myself, when I have something I need to do, should I be doing this today? This is supposed to be my day off. This is supposed to be my Sabbath time. Should I be doing this? And I'm getting to a point where I'm trying to force myself to not do things when I do have that day off. Like last Sunday, I went home and I was relaxing. I was reading some, but all I kept thinking was, man, I got to do this. I want to go out and do some weed eating outside. I wanted to work on my fence a little bit. I've got time to do it. I'm not tired. I could do it. I don't really need the rest. I'm not worn out. But I made myself. And I'm glad I did, because we never know when or how much rest we're going to have. We never know when life's going to get chaotic. And a lot of people, they worry about Sunday. Technically, the Sabbath's not even on Sunday. Biblically, the seventh day is Saturday. And we know that the early church started observing the first day, Sunday, as the Lord's day, because it was the day of his resurrection. And we often honor it on that day. But biblically, the Sabbath is Saturday. And what it says, it doesn't say work the first 6 days of the week and rest on the seventh. It says work 6 days and then rest the seventh. Basically, take a day every week, if you're able. And if not, maybe work to try to become able. Schedules are hard, and we know that people are so often forced into 7 day a week, 7/12s, or whatever their schedules are at work, and it can be hard to do. But sometimes we just have to take whatever day we can get, whether it's a Sunday, a Saturday, or a Tuesday, or whatever. But take a day. Take the rest that God's offering you. if you're able. And if you're not able, maybe see if there's a way to make it possible. Colossians 2:16 and 17, Paul writes, "So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival, or a new moon, or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ." These people dealt with a lot of opponents who had mindsets like the Pharisees. And the early Christians were still being told by some people, well, no, you still have to be circumcised, like the Jews have in the past. Or you have to observe this, or you can't eat that, or you... And remember, Jesus said, I didn't come here to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. It's not that God's commands don't matter anymore, but he's saying don't let people judge you and beat you down and restrict you. You know, if you're doing some good on the Sabbath, it's not a crime. Jesus said it's lawful. But in today's world, everyone's life is, or most people's lives are just so fast-paced and hectic that they can feel overburdened to the point where they might feel lucky to just have a few hours here and there once a week, or maybe just on the weekend, or maybe 15 minutes at the end of the day to stop and catch their breath. But could that change? Is there another way? Was there another way? Has it always been like that? You know, Satan has a lot of motive to try to steal this from us. And he's been really effective in a lot of ways. That's why I call this taking back the Sabbath, because in many ways it's been taken from us, and we do need to take it back. But I want to think about what motives might he have to steal our time, wear us out, and take away our ability to have a day like that. Well, what's the purpose of the Sabbath? It's to be restful. It's to reflect on God. It's to acknowledge and honor God. It's to remember God. It's to focus on God. It's to think about God. What possible motive could Satan have to take that from us? But in thinking about his methods, I want to look at some past methods. Let's flip to Exodus chapter 5 for a moment in your Bibles. Exodus chapter 5. And as I was studying through Exodus chapter 5 and 6, this is while the Israelites were still in slavery to Egypt, and Moses is approaching the Pharaoh to let the people go, and they want to go God asked them to come have a feast for him in the wilderness. And we know the story. Pharaoh fought him on this, and God had to bring the plagues, but this is a bit before that. But I want to go to verse 6, and this is right after he asked Pharaoh's permission to let them go out into the wilderness, have a feast for God. Look at verse 6. So the same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, basically their bosses, their supervisors, saying, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves, and you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words." Let's skip down to verse 12. So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, "Fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw." Also the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters have set over them, were beaten and were asked, "Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick, both yesterday and today, as before?" Then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, "Why are you dealing thus with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants, and they say to us, 'Make brick.' And indeed your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people." But he said, "You are idle, idle. Therefore you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.'" What do we see happening here? They had free time. Maybe not a lot. but they had some free time, and they were wanting a little more free time to go and honor God and worship God. And they're saying, you know what? We could take that free time. We could steal that from them. You know, Solomon wrote that there's nothing new under the sun. And Paul wrote to the Corinthians, telling them that no temptation will come to us except that which is common to man. Basically, it's saying the enemy has the same old playbook that he's always had. And what do we have today that is like what Pharaoh did? Think about what he did here. Think about halfway through the last century. One person with one income could work one normal job and provide for the whole family on a 40-hour week. Provide everything they needed. Now today you have to have two people working around the clock, and they're lucky to be able to keep up doing that in a lot of cases. They tax everything to death. Get their hands in your paycheck, and then every time you buy something, taking a little more, and every time someone dies, they take a chunk of it there. Every time you buy something or sell something, they take some more. Inflation goes through the roof. Our money is worth less and less, so now we've got to work even harder to make more money because that dollar is worth nothing. The prices go up. People usually get a raise every so often too, but it's usually about a small fraction of what the actual inflation is causing. And on top of that, we live in a world where we're conditioned to constantly feel like we need new and better things. The new model came out. The new toy came out. The new, bigger, fancier, whatever came out. We're conditioned to feel the need for a lot of luxuries that we really don't need. Entertainment, expensive toys. I would have never in a million years imagined that I would have a cell phone bill as big as I have today. Granted, it's for 3 people, but does all this stuff without real value and real substance, does it force people to sacrifice more time, more rest, to make more money, to keep up with the more stuff? We want more, so we spend more, so we owe more, so we work more, so we rest less. And maybe this is part of why God gave us the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, because it's a big temptation to get pulled into wasting a lot of resources on things that we maybe don't need or can't afford. More motive to take our Sabbath rest. What happens when people are exhausted? Do they change a little? Do you act the same when you are dead tired as you do when you're energized? When you're well rested? I mean, how often do you wake up from just a great refreshing nap, cranky? Or if you haven't slept right in a week, are you shorter tempered or snippy? I know I am. You know, they've used, and you've probably seen it in movies even, sleep deprivation is used as a torture or as interrogation. It says it's used as torture and for interrogation because beyond 24 hours without sleep, people suffer huge drops in cognitive function, memory, coherent speech, and social competence. Eventually, victims will suffer from hallucinations and a total break with reality. He can steal our rest, he can steal our focus, he can steal our mental clarity, he can steal our good judgment, he can steal our patience. Sleep deficiency is linked to many chronic health problems, including heart disease, kidney disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, obesity, and depression. Now we've got a whole bunch of medical bills we're going to be working off the rest of our lives. Now we're exhausted and in recovery. Now we're depressed. don't want to get out of the bed that we're not getting rest in to go work the 500 hours a week to pay for all this extra stuff. You see why Satan's got so much motive to steal our rest and why it's so important to God that we get rest? What if instead of a couple days without sleep, like what the sleep deprivation does, what if instead of a couple days without sleep, the enemy took a more gradual approach, as he often does? We look at how he's changed things in entertainment to get gradually and gradually more sinful over the decades, over the years, just a tiny bit here and there. People don't notice, but that huge, from where it was to where it is now, if that would have happened in a day, it would have never been allowed. People would have cried outrage. So it would be obvious to us if he was just keeping us up for a solid week with no sleep whatsoever. But what if he steals it bit by bit by bit, so it's less noticeable? Stealing just from our energy, from our resources. Gradually just chipping away that restful time from our lives to weaken our focus, to weaken our minds, to weaken our, it says it affects our memory. This is supposed to be a day of remembrance to God. Weakens our patience, our judgment, our temperament, to weaken and damage our bodies with illnesses, to cause a depression and anxiety, and those things often lead to a sense of hopelessness. Might as well give up at that point. What's a little rest here and there? Just like with debt. If I really want something and I see, it's 6 months same as cash, no interest or whatever, or I can just pay $10 a week for the rest of my life for this or whatever it is. If I had to come up with that money right then and there, chances are I couldn't. Or if I had to work it off to pay it off all at once, I probably wouldn't do it. At $10 or whatever a week or a month for the rest of your life might sound doable at the moment when you're looking at that thing you want, but what if the way you had to pay for that was by working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 solid months to make the income it would take to pay for that? You'd never do it because that would just completely deplete you. But what if there are 1,000 little things like that chip away little bits of our time and it accumulates to restlessness and exhaustion? What's just a few more hours of our time here and there? What's a few more hobbies? What's a little more debt? Hey, it's 6 months same as cash. Man, you can't pass that up. I can work that off in no time. What could it hurt? We need to take it back. God has given us a gift, and we should not let anyone steal that from us. We need to take it back. We are to be conformed to the image of Christ. Maybe there's an example there in how to take it back. When we think about being conformed to the image of Christ, a lot of times I think we take that as making sure that we're obedient to his commands, that we're following his instructions, things like this. But do we look at his example? Do we look at how he lived? Do we look at his pace of life? Do we learn from the example of the one who's, like we talked about last week, his yoke is easy and his burden is light? I want to be like that guy. Jesus' example, we just watch how he interacts with people and how he lives and how he moves and what he does. He never seems rushed. I don't remember reading one passage where he's like, all right, guys, okay, we got to go over here and we're going to have to feed these 5,000 people, but we got to hurry because then I'm going to walk on water and that's going to wear me out. And hang on a second, this lady needs healed. Paul, you deal with this. I don't have time for this. Great, now we got to cook for 5,000 people. Try to go out into the wilderness and get rest, and everybody just keeps following us. I need a break. We don't see him doing that. He goes at his slow pace. He goes off to be by himself in solitude. He goes off and has quiet time. When he got the news that Lazarus was dying, Lazarus was a close friend. They were very close. And he got the news. People had come to him and told him that Lazarus was dying. Did he say, all right, guys, whatever this is has to wait. I've got to get to him right now, and then just panic and frantically race to him? He stayed where he was for 2 days. And then he went there. And then he raised him from the dead. When Jairus came to Jesus to ask him to heal his daughter, they were on their way there, and Jesus stopped to heal a woman. He wasn't saying, I guess I got time. I got to hurry up and get to this kid. She's in worse shape than you are. No, he stopped and took the time. And maybe Jairus was, he's human. He's like us. He might have been a little frantic. Oh man, do we really have time for this? Jesus wasn't. He knew. And he still got there, and she was still healed, and God's will was still done in both these cases. Sometimes we feel like we have to push things along at our pace when God's pace is perfectly suited to what we need. These people were still healed, God's will was still done, and it didn't depend on the frantic rushing of a human being. I'm going to read a passage from Isaiah. I'm going to read it from the NIV. 53 verses 13 and 14. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, basically just wasting your time, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and it will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. When we take that time, when we accept that gift that God has given us, God likes to give us gifts that we have to accept. He offers us the gift of salvation, but we have to accept it. He offers this gift of rest. Are we going to accept it? But when we do, we're going to find joy in the Lord. It's going to be a different sense of peace, a different sense of connectedness to Him. Just an average rest. I think of Jesus early in his ministry when he was baptized by John the Baptist. And then the voice of the Lord, the voice of the Father from heaven said, "This is my Son, in whom I'm well pleased." Right after that, the Spirit took Jesus off into the wilderness for 40 days to fast and pray and be tempted by the devil. And you might think, well, that doesn't sound very restful. That sounds like a lot of walking and exhaustion and wandering and a lot of work. He's probably going to have to start a fire. He's probably got to build shelter. Who knows? Wilderness does not usually sound like rest unless you're kicking back camping. But he withstood direct temptation from Satan himself after fasting and walking in the wilderness for almost 7 weeks. Because that time he was taking, that time in the wilderness, he was away from the noise. He was away from the distractions from God. He was away from anything that pulled his attention from his intentional time with the Father. We have so many distractions that also chip away bit by bit at our time. Think of the thousands of hours people spend playing Candy Crush on their phone or Facebook or whatever it is. And studies show that I think it's 77% of at least young adults, the moment they get bored, they reach for their phone. Almost like a reflex. Now, Have you ever been around somebody? I'm not gonna make eye contact with anybody because I pick on some people for how much they talk. I'll just look up through this. No. We all know people who talk a lot. If you've met me, you know I'm part of the crowd. But sometimes there are people who just have to dominate the conversation, the room, whatever the situation is, to the point where nobody else can have a conversation. Nobody else can interact. And sometimes you're just sitting there, you're smiling, but you want to talk to somebody else, and you're just thinking, are they ever going to shut up? And then the moment they do, you jump in and you take your chance, or you use your opportunity to speak, and you get that word in that you've been trying to get in. And I feel like a lot of the things in our lives are that annoying friend in God's eyes, that annoying person in God's eyes, because I think we have so many things that we surround ourselves with that are distractions, that are noise, that are whatever, time killers, that the moment we step away from them and have a sense of peace, God's like, finally, all that stuff is shut up and you can listen to me. Finally, we've got some quiet time. I was just reading this book, and this guy was talking about remembering what boredom was. Remembering from back in the 90s what being bored was like, because you couldn't just pull out your phone. If you were in line somewhere waiting, you had to sit there and stare out the window or whatever, or strike up a conversation with a stranger or whatever it was. But we had all these little quiet times, opportunities to be at peace, to be at rest, to connect with God, whatever it may be. And those things are being stripped from us. They're being stripped from us. Is there a day that if we don't have a day of rest, if we don't have a day that we can take rest, is there a day that we could be resting? Is there a day that we could remodel into something that could be a day of rest for us? What's that day usually filled with? Are there some things that maybe we could prune from that day? Are there tasks that maybe we could split up between other days? Maybe we need to take personal inventory. I've been trying to lately. I've been trying to minimize everything unnecessary from my life to make more room for what matters most. It's not an easy thing to do because we get so used to being a certain way. But, if I want to lose a little time here and there, whether it be from working a little extra overtime to cover that thing that I didn't need to buy, or sitting watching TV that evening, or whatever. Maybe I lose a couple hours on Monday. Big deal. I can do the dishes on Saturday. Maybe I lose a little extra time on Tuesday. Big deal. I can mow on Saturday. Maybe I lose a little extra time on Wednesday. Big deal. I can do laundry on Saturday. And all these little things, what does God say? Get all your work done in 6 days and take that 7th day of rest. But it's so easy to say, I don't want to do it right now. I've got that day off. I can do everything. And we end up robbing ourselves of that little bit of rest we think we're getting by kicking back that day is stealing a greater rest that we could be having. Maybe we need to free up a day for real rejuvenation, for rest, for peace, for God. We need to take back the Sabbath. We need to take God's gift of rest, and we need to use it rightly. We need to honor him with it. We need to focus on him throughout. And if we do that, we're going to start to see our life changing. Your life, your heart, your mind, your peace. We're going to see that those things start changing for our good and for God's glory.